Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the DC Fall Review. For this segment, me and my friend Kendrick are going to be covering Arrow, whereas this season is kicking things off much better than the past 2 seasons, at least in my opinion.
Definitely. Not that 3 and 4 didn't have their moments, but I think season 5 is getting back to the roots of it.
Especially with the main villain, Prometheus.
One of my favorite villains from DC Comics. He was written by Grant Morrison in his early 90s JLA series. I don't know how similar Prometheus is going to be to that incarnation, but he kind of became a Green Arrow villain in James Robinson's JLA Cry for Justice miniseries, where Prometheus was responsible for blowing up a large section of downtown Star City. So Green Arrow takes it upon himself to get revenge on Prometheus. Oh, and he also infiltrated the Watchtower and cut off Roy Harper's arm, which involved him getting a robotic arm. Roy goes crazy and goes back to heroin. There's a historical issue of Green Arrow from the 70s where Hal Jordan and Oliver Queen are like telling Roy Harper not to do drugs. It's kind of a PSA kind of thing, but it goes back to that. It's such a horrible series and a horrible mark on Roy Harper's character, and it's all because of what Prometheus did.
Now I wonder if Roy ever comes back in season 5, will they have Prometheus cut his arm?
I hope not. In the comics, Arsenal had these metahuman abilities where he was able to take any sort of tool that was nearby him and change it into a weapon. And this was on full display in the 90s Titans series by Devin Grayson. It kind of brought back the original Titans together. But I want to jump back to Prometheus for a second because he's such a cool villain. He is kind of like the reverse Batman, at least in the comics version. Again, I don't know what they're going to do in Arrow, but Prometheus in the comic books, his parents were criminals who ended up getting gunned down by the cops. And young Prometheus watches that happen, kind of similar to how Bruce Wayne watched his parents get gunned down by criminals. So Prometheus spends his whole life traveling around the world to learn all the knowledge he can, and he ends up going to this Buddhist temple in Nepal where he finds this cosmic key to the Phantom Zone. He can kind of use it as a shortcut, like a portal to go around the universe, and he creates his own helmet that has this disc with the 30 best martial artists in the entire world, including Deathstroke and Batman. So all he has to do is wear his helmet and he can automatically fight like Batman or Deathstroke or anybody. It makes him super dangerous.
Interesting, because I always thought Prometheus was some low-level Bat villain. But it's nice to hear from you that he's more of a Green Arrow villain too.
Yeah, he had his moment. His initial appearances in JLA, he was part of the Injustice Gang for a minute with Lex Luthor and Queen Bee and the General. So Prometheus is definitely a villain to take seriously.
It's funny that the new villains on both Flash and Arrow are hooded mask fakers.
Yeah, that's true. And it's funny you mention that because I think Prometheus is going to have a lot of similarities to Zoom, just in the way that he's like the anti-hero who's going to push like the Flash or Arrow to be a better hero.
That brings up a question I've had. Was there a point in the comics where Green Arrow was more dark, gritty, and started killing criminals before the show started?
Yeah, I think so, especially Green Arrow, the Longbow Hunters, that really took Green Arrow in a gritty direction. From that era, they ended up killing Green Arrow off in the early 90s, shortly after Zero Hour. But he's brought back to life eventually. Kevin Smith writes a series with Oliver Queen's Green Arrow in the mid-2000s where he brings him back to life. But there was a moment in the late 90s, early 2000s where Connor Hawke was the Green Arrow and Oliver Queen was dead.
I'm more familiar with the wisecracking version. Granted, I'm basing that off what I've seen on the DCAU and Young Justice. I figured their interpretations are what Green Arrow is about.
Right, and his appearances in JLU were very much his Silver Age persona. And he was very similar when they brought him back to life in Kevin Smith's run. So he's always been kind of like the liberal, like old hippie kind of guy who's, left-wing, like fighting for the little guy type of character. And he's never really gravitated away from that, but he's always been like slightly older than the rest of his peers in the Justice League. Like if Batman is perpetually in his 30s, Oliver Queen is in his 40s. That's something that we don't quite have in the Arrowverse, even though Stephen Amell's Green Arrow is like, he was the first one there. He's the oldest in this universe that we have, but he's still like on the younger side. I don't quite see that classic Silver Age Oliver Queen in Stephen Amell.
Well, at least we got to see somewhat the classic look on Legends when the team went to Star City 2046.
That was almost more reminiscent of The Dark Knight Returns, though, since Oliver Queen was missing an arm.
As well as having a little bit of a Batman Beyond influence.
I know you're interviewing me, but we've got a bunch of new characters coming to Arrow, like Wild Dog and Ragman and a new Black Canary.
Yes, with Evelyn Sharp.
Yeah, she's probably going to be the new Black Canary.
I'm not so sure, since it looks like she's going to be the show's version of Artemis. In later episodes, I've seen Evelyn wearing just a domino mask and having her own bow. No wig this time, and it looks like Laurel's fate hasn't changed after Flashpoint.
I don't know. I mean, she could be back. I think she has a contract to appear in some of the shows this year. So I don't personally know what to expect.
Here's a thought. Maybe Earth 2 Laurel comes back. Because from the early comics, Earth 2 Laurel lost her husband and eventually decided to live on Earth 1. From there, she began having feelings for the Green Arrow.
I've read those original comics. This is where crossover from the Justice League of America series, and I think it was All-Star Squadron was the name of the book at that time, but it was pretty much all set in Earth 2 and focused around the JSA characters. But that was the original Black Canary that we had in the Silver Age Justice League stories, was a refugee from Earth 2. And she was in the original Justice Society, and because of interdimensional tempering that involved Johnny Thunder and the Thunderbolt, he actually ended up being the villain of this story. But it ended with Black Canary crossing over into Earth 1 and just staying there. And from there, she started to create the classic relationship that we know with Black Canary and Green Arrow.
Also, it was great to see Laurel's last words to Oliver, where she asked for her not to be the last canary. When they had that scene from an outside angle, I was expecting some kind of plan to fake her death until Dark was taken care of.
And it's still in the realm of possibility, especially with the Flashpoint changes. Like, it's all on the table. Like, who knows what could happen. When you have that level of continuity rearranging, anything is possible. So one of the first fight scenes of episode 1 of Arrow, it has Arrow fighting Anarchy. And it starts with this beautiful shot of them in silhouette fighting each other behind a screen before Arrow pushes Anarchy into view, which was great because I've been feeling lately that Arrow has a lot of room to step up, and that might be because I'm spoiled by Netflix's Daredevil series. I look at Daredevil and I think Arrow could totally do this and be so much better for the kind of stunts that they pull in Daredevil. I think they might be looking at it as a source of inspiration because there have been some fight scenes that have really stepped up this season.
Definitely. The fight scene there reminded me of last season's episode where some buildings were exploding because a behind-the-scenes video explained how they were going for less CGI and more realistic explosions.
That's good. It's always better to have practical effects, I think. If you can make it real, that's more power to you.
Agreed. Now, in terms of Felicity, do you rather have Oliver and Felicity remain friends or back together by the end of this season?
I don't have as much of a problem with Felicity as most people on the internet do. I can understand why people find her annoying at times, but I like the relationship that we've seen develop between her and Oliver, and if they do get back together, that'd be cool to see how that goes. But there's nothing like Green Arrow and Black Canary. It's like Clark Kent, Lois Lane. So I think somehow, some way, Laurel's probably going to come back. Or the real Dinah Lance. It's because it's Dinah who is the Black Canary in the comics who falls in love with Green Arrow. And it is Laurel Dinah Lance, I think, is her name in Arrow.
I think in the show her full name was Dinah Laurel Lance, as mentioned by Tommy in the pilot episode.
I'm fairly certain about that. But even in the recent DC Rebirth, they took the time in the DC Rebirth #1 to have Green Arrow and Black Canary having these dreams and being very conscious that there are these memories that they lost, that they see each other from across a crime scene, and where there's a lot of superheroes present, but they lock eyes and they realize oh, I don't know who that person is, but I feel like I should know them. That was a scene that happened in DC Rebirth, and it's something that I agree with. Black Canary and Green Arrow are meant to be together.
By the way, do you miss having Felicity's mom around since she and Quentin Lance broke up?
I kind of do. I liked that happy ending for the both of them. I was also sad to see Detective Lance in kind of a washed up alcoholic mode. So I hope that he is able to redeem his character, and I think he will. I think he's going to join Team Arrow for sure this season. Maybe even become the vigilante, because I think that's someone who's going to appear as well.
Maybe. I believe the character's already made a cameo appearance so far.
He was on a computer screen for a second. It was a blink and you miss it moment.
Also the fact that on later episodes, we see one of the vigilante identities, Adrian Chase, as a new DA.
Okay, then Adrian Chase in the comics is the vigilante. So at least the 70s, 80s version. That was by Marv Wolfman.
The writers sure do use a lot of Marv Wolfman's characters for the show.
Yeah, they really have. I mean, he was most well known for doing the New Teen Titans series that introduced Deathstroke. He might have even created Deathstroke. I think he did. But he was also the writer for Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yes, as well as creating Hive.
Although he didn't create Damien Dark, but I think he did create Hive.
I remember looking back at the comics with Talia al Ghul's first appearance, there was a bad guy with the last name Dark, but he did not use any magic, I believe.
Damien Dark comes from the Titans series that I mentioned earlier with Arsenal. From the mid-90s, he was a very throwaway character in that arc, but he was associated with Hive. But yeah, I kind of want to talk about the flashbacks in Arrow, and the Russian stuff.
Yes, the flashbacks this year are a little more compelling than the past 2 seasons.
I would agree. Being on the island and dealing with magic. It felt like a very slow build for last season's flashbacks.
The Bravo is definitely interesting for it fills in some plot holes as to how did Oliver learn how to speak Russian, become one of its members, and probably where he learned some more skills.
Now we know. Or we will know. But yeah, I think it's really interesting too with modern events happening right now about Russia. There's a lot of talk about Russian aggression. I think it's really interesting, at least, that Arrow is tackling like a large Russian element.
I'm hoping that this season's flashbacks aren't so connected to Prometheus.
Mm-hmm.
They've been constantly using that connection the past 3 seasons. I mean, look at season 1. Nothing from his experiences on the island that year came back to haunt him. Don't get me wrong, the flashpoints for season 2 went great in terms of using Deathstroke as the villain, but they kept reusing that plot device for seasons 3 and 4 with the virus and the idol respectively.
Right, it was all very connected and informed what was going on. That's something that's been missing, I think, since season 2.
I say these flashbacks will probably showcase a more brutal style of fighting and torture Oliver uses.
Yep. And that, at least, is probably going to inform the modern day stuff, because he needs to get back to basics and be the vigilante that he is.
Plus, what do you think of the fan theory where Tommy Merlin might be Prometheus?
I could see it happening. Prometheus in the comics doesn't really have an actual identity. If they made him into Tommy Merlin, I think that could be really cool and it could really work. So, as long as it's explained the right way, not too cheaply, but I'd like to see that showdown happen. It would be very similar to Hush from the Batman characters, how they were childhood friends, who, had this ultimate showdown.
It would be quite the build-up for the two of them from season 1, especially if this is the last season.
I always personally thought that Arrow would be ending at season 5. But with the CW success in their superhero series, I feel like it has a lot of possibility to move on into season 6 without doing the flashback mechanism as much.
Part of me would think so, because through each season we see Oliver's journey from being Strand, Leah, and you, and those scenes make up a quarter to a half an episode, depending on the episode itself. I mean, they could continue after season 5 without the flashbacks like the rest of the shows. Look at Smallville, it lasted for 10 years.
Exactly. So there's really no telling, and even if Arrow ends, they still have this universe where Oliver Queen shows up in multiple shows. And I feel like even if Arrow ends, Stephen Amell's time as the character is just beginning. He'll be playing Oliver Queen for many years, I have no doubt.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Now, if you want to see the Flashpoint review video, click on the box right here. Soon enough, I'll have not only the reviews on Supergirl and Legends premiere episodes, but also on the Heroes vs. Aliens crossover. So stay tuned.